away from the vehicle and put your hands where I can see them, now!
Officer, I'm simply pumping gas. My hands are visible. What is the problem?
The problem is you fit the description. Don't make me ask you again. Turn around.
I am a federal director for Homeland Security.
This is a government vehicle. Check the plates.
The body cam recording you just saw captured every single frame of the interaction, but what it couldn't capture was the sinking feeling in the pit of the department's stomach when they eventually reviewed the footage. At that exact moment, under the buzzing fluorescent lights of a suburban gas station, Officer Mark Miller had absolutely no idea who he was talking to. He saw a profile, he saw a demographic, he saw a challenge to his authority, but he didn't see the federal credentials resting in the glove box, and he certainly didn't see the decades of high-level government service standing calmly in a tailored suit. Director David Vance wasn't just a motorist, he was one of the highest-ranking officials in the Department of Homeland Security, a man whose daily decisions impacted national safety. Officer Miller treated him like a criminal suspect based on nothing more than intuition and bias. It was a miscalculation that would spiral into a national news story, trigger a federal investigation, and ultimately result in a massive financial blow to the city. What started as a routine gas stop on a quiet evening became a case study in police misconduct, proving that even the most powerful men in government aren't immune to profiling, but they sure know how to fight back. By the time the dust settled, that 15-second escalation would translate into a $5, $1 million judgment. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, I need you to do something for me. Scroll down to the comment section right now. Based on that clip alone, do you think the officer was just doing his job? Or was he power tripping from the second he stepped out of his car? I want to see your vote, protecting or power trip. Leave your comment now. And if you believe in holding bad actors accountable, hit that subscribe button. We are exposing these cases every single week, and trust me, you do not want to miss the breakdown of the lawsuit coming up at the end of this video. To understand the gravity of this mistake, we have to understand the man standing at pump number 4. David Vance was not someone who walked through life expecting special treatment. Born in Chicago and raised by a single mother, he had clawed his way up through the ranks of federal service with a reputation for absolute integrity and a quiet, stoic demeanor. He spent his 20s as a field agent for the FBI, working complex white-collar crime cases that required patience, intellect, and an encyclopedic knowledge of the law. By his 40s, he had transitioned to the Department of Homeland Security, eventually rising to the position of regional director. His resume read like a checklist of excellence. He had overseen the security protocols for 3 presidential inaugurations. He had led interagency task forces that dismantled international trafficking rings. He held a law degree from Georgetown, which he earned at night while working full-time for the Bureau. Colleagues knew Vance as the diplomat, a man who could de-escalate a room simply by walking into it. He was the guy you called when tempers flared and you needed a cool head to prevail. He didn't panic, he didn't shout, he assessed threats, calculated risks, and neutralized them. On this particular Saturday, however, Director Vance wasn't overseeing a national security crisis. He wasn't briefing the White House or coordinating with the Secret Service. He was doing what millions of Americans do every weekend, running errands. He had just left a charity gala where he'd given a keynote speech on community resilience, hence the Navy bespoke suit and the polished Oxfords. He was driving his government-issued SUV, a vehicle specifically registered to the Department of Homeland Security, fitted with run-flat tires and ballistic glass, though you wouldn't know it unless you looked closely. He was on his way home to his wife of 25 years, planning to maybe catch the end of a basketball game. He pulled into the Shell station off Highway 9 not to conduct an operation, but simply because his fuel light had dinged. He was a citizen minding his own business, armed with nothing but his rights and a lifetime of service to his country. The scene was set for what should have been a completely forgettable transaction. It was early evening, that specific time of day photographers call magic hour, where the sky is a deep bruised purple and the streetlights are just starting to hum to life. The gas station was brightly lit, a beacon of commerce on the side of the suburban sprawl. The pavement was slick from a passing shower, reflecting the red and white branding of the canopy above. Director Vance pulled his black Chevy Tahoe up to the pump, killed the engine, and stepped out, He swiped his personal credit card, careful never to use government funds for personal mileage, and lifted the nozzle. The rhythmic thrum-thrum-thrum of the gas pumping was the only sound accompanying the distant swoosh of highway traffic. Enter Officer Mark Miller. Miller was a 44-year-old patrolman with the local municipal police department. He had been on the force for 15 years, a tenure that should have brought wisdom and discretion. Instead, Miller's personnel file, which would later be ripped open by civil rights attorneys, told a different story. He was known in the precinct as a stats guy, an officer who chased arrest numbers to compensate for a lack of quality police work. He had a reputation for being jumpy, for perceiving disrespect where there was none, and for escalating minor infractions into major confrontations. Miller was parked across the street in an unmarked cruiser, monitoring traffic. When he saw the black Tahoe pull in, something triggered in his mind. In his police report, he would later claim the vehicle looked out of place and that the driver matched the description of a suspect involved in a check fraud ring operating in the area. This was, as the investigation would prove, a complete fabrication. The suspect they were looking for was 20 years younger and drove a sedan. But Miller saw a black man in a luxury SUV in a predominantly white suburb, and his biases filled in the rest of the narrative. He didn't run the plates. If he had, the system would have immediately flagged the vehicle as federal property, perhaps even returning a do not detain instruction for minor infractions. But Miller didn't check. He acted on impulse. He flipped on his lights, not to pull Vance over, but to ambush him at the pump. He whipped his cruiser into the lot, tires chirping on the wet asphalt, and came to a screeching halt directly behind Vance's bumper. The aggressive positioning was a tactical choice designed to intimidate. Before Vance could even finish pumping his gas, Miller was out of the car. His hand was already hovering near his duty belt, fingers twitching near his holster. He didn't approach with a "good evening, sir." He approached with a shout, shattering the quiet evening air. "Officer Miller, step away from the vehicle and put your hands where I can see them, now." Director Vance paused. He didn't drop the nozzle. He didn't flinch. He simply turned his head, his face a mask of confusion that quickly hardened into professional resolve. "Director Vance, officer. I'm simply pumping gas. My hands are visible. What is the problem here?" The air between them crackled with instant volatile tension. This was the moment where the script usually flips, where fear takes over. But Vance wasn't afraid. He was analyzing. He knew the Fourth Amendment better than the man holding the taser. He knew that under Terry v. Ohio, an officer needs reasonable, articulable suspicion that a crime has occurred or is about to occur to detain someone. Pumping gas while wearing a suit did not meet that threshold. "Officer Miller, the problem is you fit the description. Don't make me ask you again. Turn around." Beat Miller was already committed. He had issued a command in a public space. Backing down now would damage his ego. He moved closer, entering Vance's personal space, his chest puffed out in a display of dominance. The blue and red strobe lights from the cruiser washed over them, creating a disorienting strobe light effect. "Director Vance, I am a federal director for Homeland Security. This is a government vehicle. Check the plates." Vance's voice was level, almost bored. He was offering Miller a lifeline, a way out of the trap he had set for himself. Check the plates. It was the logical next step. But logic had left the conversation the moment Miller stepped out of his car. To Miller, the claim of being a federal director sounded like a lie, a desperate bluff from a suspect trying to talk his way out of cuffs. "Officer Miller, I don't care who you think you are. Get against the car or you're going down." Miller's hand moved to his radio, but not to call in the plates. He was calling for backup, signaling an uncooperative subject. He was building a narrative in real time. The suspect was resisting. The suspect was belligerent. Music swell, low-tension drone inside his mind. Vance was calculating the odds. If he physically resisted, he would be shot or tased. If he reached for his credentials inside his jacket, Miller might claim he was reaching for a weapon. His only weapon was his voice and the Bodycam lens staring at him like a robotic eye. "Director Vance, you are making a career-ending mistake. I suggest you lower your voice and call your supervisor." This was the trigger point. In the psychology of bad policing, this is known as contempt of cop. Even though it's not a crime to be rude, or in this case truthful, officers like Miller perceive any challenge to their absolute authority as a threat that must be neutralized with force. Miller's face flushed a deep, angry red. Veins bulged in his neck. He wasn't enforcing the law anymore, he was enforcing his will. "Officer Miller, that's it. Hands behind your back. You're done." Miller lunged forward, grabbing Vance's wrist and twisting it sharply behind his back. It was a control hold designed to inflict pain compliance. Vance didn't fight the torque, but he didn't go silent either. He looked directly at the officer's chest, right into the camera lens. "Director Vance, this body cam is live, officer. Remember that when the lawsuit hits your desk." By now, other patrons at the gas station had stopped what they were doing. Phones were out. The digital witnesses were multiplying. Miller, sensing the audience, only got rougher. He shoved Vance against the side of the SUV, the metal of the gas pump rattling from the impact. "Officer Miller, stop resisting. Stop fighting me." "Director Vance, I am not resisting. I am complying under duress. You are violating my civil rights under Section 1983. You have no probable cause." "Officer Miller, shut up. You have the right to remain silent, so use it." Miller kicked Vance's legs apart, patting him down aggressively. He found the wallet in the back pocket. He felt the badge case. For a split second, Miller's hand froze. The shape of the leather holder was unmistakable. It wasn't a standard bifold, it was a federal commission book, but the adrenaline was too high. He pulled it out and tossed it onto the hood of the car without opening it. Ask yourself honestly right now, have you ever tried to reason with someone who was already 100% convinced you were wrong? It's impossible. Type yes if you've been there. "Director Vance, open the badge case, officer. Read the commission." "Officer Miller, I'll read it when we get to booking. You're going for disorderly conduct and resisting arrest." The irony was suffocating. Vance was being arrested for disorderly conduct while standing perfectly still and resisting arrest while voluntarily putting his hands behind his back. Miller was stacking charges to justify the initial stop, a classic technique known as creating the crime. He needed a reason for the handcuffs, so the handcuffs became the reason. "Director Vance, officer, I am informing you that I am armed. My service weapon is locked in the center console safe, as per federal regulation. Do not attempt to breach the vehicle." "Officer Miller, gun! He's got a gun!" Miller drew his own weapon, pointing it at the back of Vance's head. The escalation was psychotic. Vance had disclosed a legally stored firearm as a courtesy, and Miller reacted as if he were under fire. "Director Vance, it is in a safe. I am handcuffed. Think, officer. Think about what you are doing." Miller holstered his weapon slowly, realizing he had overreacted, but he couldn't stop. He dragged Vance away from the pump, leaving the nozzle still inserted in the tank, the transaction unfinished. He marched the Director of Homeland Security toward the back seat of a dirty municipal cruiser, shoving his head down roughly as he forced him inside. "Officer Miller, sit tight. You can tell your story to the judge. Director Vance, oh, I intend to, and the Attorney General, and your chief." As the door slammed shut, separating Vance from the outside world, the silence inside the cruiser was deafening. Miller got into the front seat, breathing heavy, panting from the exertion of arresting a man who hadn't fought back. He picked up his radio. "Officer Miller, dispatch, one in custody. Transporting to Central." He had no idea that he had just radioed in the end of his own career. The drive to the precinct was a study in contrast. In the front seat, Officer Miller was riding a high of adrenaline, convincing himself he had just taken a dangerous criminal off the streets. In the back, sandwiched between the hard plastic partition and the molded seat, Director Vance was cataloging every sensory detail for his legal team. The smell of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. The tightness of the handcuffs cutting into his wrists. The reckless speed at which Miller took the corners. He remained silent, knowing that anything he said would only give Miller ammunition to fabricate more charges. When they arrived at the station, the humiliation continued. Miller paraded Vance through the sally port and into the booking area, holding him by the upper arm as if he were a flight risk. The station was busy, a Saturday night mix of drunken disorderlies and petty theft suspects. Miller shoved Vance toward the counter. "Book him for disorderly, resisting, and failure to obey," Miller told the desk sergeant, tossing Vance's personal effects onto the counter. The wallet, the keys, and the badge case. The desk sergeant, a veteran named Kowalski, looked at the items. He looked at Vance, standing tall despite the cuffs, his suit rumpled but his dignity intact. Then he looked at the badge case. Kowalski reached out and flipped it open. The gold shield of the Department of Homeland Security gleamed under the lights. The ID card next to it identified David Vance as a regional director with a security clearance level higher than the building they were standing in. Kowalski's face drained of color. He looked up at Miller, then back at the badge. "Miller," Kowalski said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Did you read this?" "Read what?" "It's probably fake," Miller scoffed, reaching for a soda. "It's not fake, you idiot," Kowalski snapped. "This is a federal director. You arrested a DHS boss?" The room went quiet. The other officers stopped processing paperwork. Miller froze, the soda halfway to his mouth. "What?" "Uncuff him," Kowalski barked, coming around the counter. "Uncuff him right now." Miller fumbled for his keys, his hands suddenly shaking. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The check fraud suspect narrative evaporated. The resisting arrest charge looked ridiculous. As the cuffs clicked open, Vance rubbed his wrists, his expression unreadable. "I need a phone," Vance said calmly, "and I need your watch commander." Within 10 minutes, the atmosphere in the precinct shifted from routine processing to full-blown panic mode. The watch commander, a lieutenant, came storming down from his office, tucking his shirt in. He took one look at Vance's credentials and nearly fainted. "Director Vance, I am so sorry," the lieutenant stammered. "There has been a terrible misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Lieutenant," Vance corrected him, his voice ice cold. "It was a violation of federal law and a deprivation of civil rights. I want the chief of police notified, now." While the lieutenant scrambled to make the call that would ruin the chief's weekend, Vance stood in the middle of the booking room, refusing to sit, refusing water. He took out a small notebook from his jacket pocket, which Miller had failed to confiscate, and began writing down names and badge numbers. Every officer who had watched and done nothing, the sergeant, and Miller, who was now standing in the corner, pale and staring at the floor, realizing the magnitude of his error. "Do you think the other officers in the room should have stepped in sooner, or is the blue wall of silence too strong? Let me know what you think, below." Vance didn't scream. He didn't threaten to have their jobs on the spot. He simply documented. He was gathering evidence. The investigation wasn't starting next week. It was starting right now, and he was the lead investigator on his own case. Director Vance walked out of the precinct 2 hours later, not as a free man, but as a plaintiff. He didn't go home to sleep. He went straight to the federal courthouse downtown, waking up a U.S. magistrate judge to document the incident while the injuries to his wrists were still fresh. By Sunday morning, he had retained one of the top civil rights firms in the country. By Monday, the lawsuit was filed. The complaint was a 60-page masterpiece of legal warfare. It didn't just allege misconduct. It alleged a systemic pattern of racial profiling within the department, with Officer Miller as the tip of the spear. The specific allegations were damning: unlawful seizure, excessive force, false imprisonment, and malicious prosecution. But what really set the internet on fire was the Bodycam footage. Vance's legal team released the video on Tuesday. It hit YouTube and Twitter like a bomb. The view count jumped from 10,000 to 5 million in under 48 hours. The contrast was what made it viral. The unhinged shouting officer versus the terrifyingly calm government official. The hashtag Director Vance trended globally. Commentators dissected every frame, pointing out how Miller escalated the situation within seconds of arrival. The police department tried to get ahead of the story. The chief issued a video apology, calling the incident regrettable and promising a thorough internal review. But Vance publicly rejected the apology, stating, "I do not want an apology. I want policy." The internal affairs investigation, which usually drags on for months, was expedited due to the crushing national pressure. And what they found in Miller's history was appalling. Investigators pulled 5 years of Miller's stop and frisk data. The statistics were undeniable. Miller stopped black drivers at a rate 4 times higher than white drivers in the same patrol zones. He used force in 30% of those stops, compared to the department average of 5%. He had a history of ghost stops, stopping cars for made-up infractions like tinted windows or failure to signal just to fish for warrants. He had 12 previous excessive force complaints, all of which had been dismissed by his supervisors as unsubstantiated. But they couldn't dismiss this one, not with the director of DHS pointing the finger. The investigation also revealed the check fraud ring Miller claimed to be looking for didn't exist in that sector. Dispatch logs proved he hadn't been assigned to any such detail. He had lied on his initial police report, a felony offense known as falsifying official records. The stats guy had been cooking the books for years, and it took a victim with the power of the federal government behind him to finally open the ledger. The fall of Officer Mark Miller was swift and total. 3 weeks after the incident, he was terminated for cause. The termination letter, which was later made public, cited 14 specific policy violations, including truthful reporting, de-escalation protocols, and conduct unbecoming of an officer. The police union, usually aggressive in defending its members, remained noticeably silent. They knew this was a losing battle. Miller tried to appeal, but the arbitration board upheld the firing in a record one-day hearing. But Vance wasn't interested in just one scalp. He wanted the system. The Department of Justice, prompted by Vance's initial report, launched a pattern or practice investigation into the entire police department. Federal investigators descended on the precinct, combing through servers and emails. Their report, released 6 months later, was a scorching indictment of the department's leadership. It found that supervisors routinely ignored red flags in officer behavior and that the stats-driven culture encouraged unconstitutional policing. To avoid a federal takeover, the city entered into a consent decree, a court-enforced agreement to overhaul their policing. They were forced to rewrite their use of force policy, mandating de-escalation as a first resort. They had to implement an early intervention system to flag officers like Miller before they hurt someone. And they had to pay. The settlement negotiation was brief. The city attorneys knew that if they took this to a jury, with David Vance on the stand, a verdict could be in the tens of millions. They settled for $5, $1 million. It was one of the largest single victim settlements in the state's history. In a final act of character, Director Vance didn't buy a boat or a vacation home. He announced at a press conference that after legal fees, every cent of the settlement would be donated to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and a scholarship program for minority law students. Standing at the podium, he said, "This money is not a reward, it is a penalty, and penalties only matter if they force change." As for Miller, his career in law enforcement is over. His name has been added to the National Decertification Index, effectively blacklisting him from ever wearing a badge again. Last reports placed him working in private logistics, a far cry from the authority he once abused. This story matters because it shatters the myth that compliance guarantees safety. David Vance did everything right. He was polite, he was compliant, he was successful, he was arguably one of the most powerful men in the zip code, and none of that protected him from being profiled, assaulted, and humiliated. If this can happen to a director of Homeland Security, imagine what happens to the 19-year-old college student who doesn't know the case law. Imagine what happens to the single father who can't afford a high-powered attorney. That is the reality we have to confront. David Vance's victory was a triumph of justice, yes, but it was also a terrifying reminder of how easily that justice can be denied to those without his advantages. Accountability was served here, but only because the victim was too big to fail. We need a system where you don't have to be a federal director to be treated with basic human dignity. I want to hear from you one last time. What is your biggest takeaway from this case? Is it the $5 million penalty, or the fact that it took a federal director to expose a bad cop? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you found this story compelling, please share it. The more people who understand these laws, the more we can protect our rights. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the justice system. I'll see you in the next one.